Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires, to talk about the Empire, the issues it has, and what could be done to improve them, because there are significant problems that the Empire does have. It's nowhere near as bad as Kislev has it, and I had to rush here to save Kislev from all their many enemies as Karl Franz, but it's nowhere near as bad as Kislev does have it. But it's still pretty bad. Now, any discussion about the Empire has to start with the Imperial Authority and the Prestige system. Prestige is pretty meaningless, honestly, because you will gain a significant amount of prestige every turn from the battles you're fighting, the settlements you're owning. It can be an issue early on, but once you get going, once you get past the early game, you will have so much prestige you don't know what to deal with it, to do with it. Like, what could I do with the prestige in this situation? Sure, I could improve relations between the Elector Counts, and I do need a certain amount of prestige for the events that keep coming up, but there's nothing to really spend it on except improving the diplomatic relations between the Elector Counts. And that's pretty much it, and the events that are coming up. And it's not really a huge amount of prestige that is required. But then, of course, there is Imperial Authority. And Imperial Authority, you start with 0, and you're quickly going to lose 1, because Festus is going to wipe out Hochland. Now, you can retake Hochland, give it back to them, and get some Imperial Authority for it, and a pretty good amount of fealty for taking out Festus for them. But you're gonna start at -1, so you're gonna have, you're gonna start, and you're in a danger spot of getting beyond -2, so you're quite likely going to get to the declining rate, because Ostermark is under significant threat. Like here, they almost got wiped out by Azag and Draika. I was able to rush quickly enough to save them, but a significant amount of their territory was taken out by Draika and Azag, the Slaughterer. And I've been running around putting out fires. The problem with the Imperial Authority is that you're running around because you can't let the Elector Counts die, or you're gonna lose it like Imperial Authority. You're running around putting out fires. The problem with that is that when it comes to the Elector Counts, all you can get with them is a Non-Aggression Pact, military access, and trade. Mind you, that Non-Aggression Pact won't stop the events, and this is where the system is really bullshit. It won't stop the events where they try and secede, and thus a war is declared. So what's the value in having Non-Aggression Pacts with the Elector Counts? I guess it's between themselves, but it's also worth knowing that they can't get military alliances or defensive alliances with them, nor can you. You know what's baffling to me is we have a system in place in Warhammer 3, the Allegiance system, right? We have the Allegiance system that would be very, very well suited for the Empire, like get a high amount, let's say instead of Imperial Authority and fealty, just co-opt the Allegiance system. If you can get to 100 allegiance, maybe you can then confederate with them, as opposed to waiting and waiting and waiting for the stupid fealty. Like, it just seems redundant to have the Imperial Authority system, the fealty system, when there is already a system in place in the game that could be used. So with Allegiance, that could work a lot better, but you can't have Allegiance with the various Elector Counts. Because, yeah, it would work better. You can loan armies, maybe, you know, if you're playing as Karl Franz or Gelt, even, you get a discount when it comes to loaning an army, so you can actually, hey, go to an Elector Count and say, hey, I need your help to deal with this issue, with this threat. And on top of that, because you can only get Non-Aggression Pacts and military access with these guys, you can't recruit troops. You can't recruit troops while you're running around the Empire, because it's not your territory. You can't replenish the troops you have, and that creates major issues for you when it comes to the game plan, and is a journey of suffering. It's, again, not particularly hard, but it is a genuine journey of suffering to deal with. And so those issues, those are the core issues for the Empire, but it doesn't stop there. The Empire has a really good arsenal of troops, buildings, heroes, what have you. if you can recruit them. Now over here, for instance, I can recruit a good amount of warrior priests, imperial captains, because I've imperial captains, quite a lot of them, and some witch hunters because I've gotten the short victory, so that gives me a free capacity to all heroes. Okay. And you certainly do get significant benefits when it comes to their recruit ranks. That's good. That's all well and good right there. True enough. However, although that's very well and good when it comes to the Empire, they do have a lot of early game issues. They do scale well in the late game. That's one of the things the Empire does have going for it. And Reichland in particular is a really great province that gives you, like in my case, it's giving me 4,000 income, and it's not yet tier 5, though it's not necessarily going to go higher than this, with the exception of the port. And yeah, the Imperial Academy is also something I could potentially use over here. But it's not necessarily going to go much higher than this when it comes down to it. So you can gain a good amount of income as the Empire. However, early on, you are going to be in a trouble spot. While your weaving houses can generate a decent amount of income from the very, very start of it, the problem is maintaining large armies of the units you need as the Empire can be a bit of an issue. That's because by default from settlements you can only recruit spearmen, or if you have the DLC from Warhammer 2, the Beast and Hunter, you can recruit archers. The archers are generally going to be the early game units you're going to bother with, but then you want to drop them in favor of crossbows. The problem, of course, as you might imagine, is that recruiting crossbows, recruiting all those good cavalry units, artillery units, all the things that make the Empire what it is ridiculously expensive. The problem with the Empire, I feel, is the only good and efficient army they can get for much of the early game is stacking archers. And archers, while they'll do fine in an open battle, and even minor settlements, they'll do okay, though that depends on the terrain, they will absolutely struggle in a siege. What's annoying as the Empire is that you do have some incredibly good units. Hellstorm rocket batteries, demigryphs, handgunners, great swords, all that. You do have some good units, but those are mid-game units that can cost a good amount to recruit, for instance, and to maintain. For instance, this is an army that I'm having here. This is a pretty good army. Knights of More, demigryph knights, hellstorms. Like, this would wipe out. And it has. Like, I destroyed Durfo, who was invading Nolan over there. I wiped him out, took Nolan for myself for a bit, and then gave it back to the Elector Count, so I could get the state troops. But while an army like this is really effective, it is ridiculously expensive. Now, granted, it's under Gotrek, and Gotrek doesn't have any of the skills to reduce the cost, doesn't have any of the items either. But even under a regular lord, it would not be that cheaper. Like, I'm gonna give this army, once Gotrek disappears in a couple of turns here, I'm gonna give this army to Balthazar Gelt, and he'll take it over. It will be better under Gelt, but it's still a significant amount of income, because you can generate a ridiculous amount of money, but so will your armies cost significant amounts, your good armies, to recruit. I feel like army-wise, the problem is they're just too weak early game, considering the myriad of threats. And when you confederate an Elector Count, generally all they're really gonna come with are either some crappy horsemen, or maybe some crappy artillery. Mortars are okay, but they're not that great given the ability of the AI to dodge them. And more often than not, crossbowmen, spearmen, and swordsmen. That's it, and that's your mid-game army. There are quite a few factions, races in the game that have better tier 1 armies than you do, let alone the strength of their mid-game armies or late-game armies. Now, granted, you do have powerful end-game armies, don't get me wrong on that, but it takes a long time to get there, and meanwhile, you're running around unable to take territory because of the Elector Counts, struggling to grow, dealing with the myriad of threats. and eventually you will get going, you will get the territory. Being able to, if you rush Sylvania early on, that's a godsend for your economy, because Sylvania will generate a significant amount of income, in particular because of the gold mine that they have there. It's not going to be the Reichland level of income, true enough, though it's worth mentioning that Reichland is a higher level at the moment and has an extra settlement. But it is going to help you a lot. And it's not like you can take other territory either. Sure, you could wait for Hochland to be wiped out and take their territory, but it's only going to be 2 settlements. That won't be a significant amount of income, and then you will have to worry about defending it. Not that you won't have to worry about defending it if you give it to the AI, given how competent the AI has shown itself again and again when it comes to this game. When it comes to handling their own borders. Their Elector Counts are very weak. So you have a campaign where you're limited by the systems of the campaign, and because of those limitations you really can't get going for a very long time. Once you do get going, you are nigh on unstoppable. Don't get me wrong, this is the difference between Kislev and the Empire. Kislev will always have a bad economy. The Empire can get a good economy, but it is genuine frustration together, and before they get there, they are going to struggle. What's also frustrating is the way the recruitment works. Like units like great swords, for instance, do require for you to have an armory. Things like demogryphs require you to have an armory. Well, the blacksmith requires you is required for Empire Knights. The armory is required for great swords, the steam tank, and demigryph. Let's say you don't care about the steam tank, but you will care over there. So you need not only these 3 structures to have access to your roster, you also need a 4th to get that. And then on top of that, there's the heroes. The captain can be recruited from the barracks chain, but the captain is one of the worst. Witch hunters require you to get the public order building, to get the tavern. The Temple of Sigmar is required for the warrior priests. Okay. And the battle wizards, and I can't even recruit one from Altdorf. The battle wizards can only be recruited, and even then a limited numbers initially until you're like tier 5, can only be recruited from a wizard's conclave, which is a fairly expensive building. And it's not like you have so powerful magic users that you absolutely want to get that. The Empire has a lot of good tools, but they don't have easy access to those tools, nor do they have the economy to support that. And that is the problem. They also have a lot of foes next to them. The Empire itself is very vulnerable from a geographic position, surrounded by enemies on all sides. And if you didn't have to bother with all the borders of the Empire, it would be much better, but you do have to bother with the borders of Empire. You're dealing with a vast swath of territory, and if you lose any of the Elector Counts, you get penalized in a fairly significant way. Now you might ask, well, what about Volkmar, and what about the Hunts Marshal? Well, Volkmar starts over here in Sundenberg, and outside of making potentially deals with Rapans and etc., he also is surrounded by enemies, but he doesn't have anyone to help him, and he doesn't have great regions over here, although Kasabar can be pretty damn useful, but in this case, Cetra and Manfred have wiped them out. But Southlands is also a pretty terrible area, though it is more narrow, so you won't have the same issue. Now, I do want to laugh a bit at this notion, though, with regards to climate types. So, if you're playing Karl Franz, Gelt can settle the mountains, that's a godsend for him. But if you're playing Karl Franz, you can settle the desert just fine, but not the mountains. That is bullshit. Just gonna call it out, especially since there's so many mountains that do surround you, where you may want to settle. For instance, here I've accepted a peace treaty with Durfo because me taking the mountains would not give me anything. Sure, if you're playing as Gelt, like if you want to play a campaign in the Empire, play as Gelt. He's much better than Karl Franz. I mean, Karl Franz himself is going to be much better if the AI is playing him, at least because he starts with the entirety of the Reichland. If only the developers had known that, yeah, you kind of needed some extra territory as a player instead of having the same miserable campaign start again and again and again. As for the Hunts Marshal, who I've stated is the best legendary lord because he has the best starting position, he does have some miserable campaign mechanics, and he does have his own enemies to deal with, but it is a much better campaign when you aren't dealing with the Imperial Authority system. When you are in a good region, it can be a lot better, but then the weaker economy, the limitations on units that you're going to have because of that economy, and, well, his own mechanics limiting the units you can get, are things that are going to hurt you. Beyond the doom stacks of Lizardmen just emerging from the jungle to wipe you out, he would really need to get rid of that or have some way to counter it instead of just constantly having enemy armies spawning if he gets high hostility. And he also struggles with public order because high hostility does affect his public order as well, his control level as well, which can create quite a few issues for him. So yeah, all of the Imperial Legendary Lords do have problems, some significant, some less significant. I would certainly say the Hunts Marshal has the best time compared to Gelt or Karl Franz or even poor Volkmar over here in the south. I've played the campaign as Volkmar. You are fighting numerous stacks of enemies, at least when you're fighting Manfred. You're fighting numerous stacks, your territory is very exposed. You can get some things done, and Volkmar can become a true powerhouse, but it is also a story of suffering. Anyway, that's all I had to say. Costin here, signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.